In my earlier video on Cripple Creek's mud flood, I discussed the gold telluride known as sylvanite, a compound of gold, silver, and tellurium, and showed the four main locations of sylvanite according to the mainstream narrative. Those locations are Transylvania, Romania, Kalgoorlie, Australia, Cripple Creek, Colorado, and Kirkland Lake, Ontario, and they form what I call the sylvanite triangle. But there are many more than just 4 sylvanite deposits. Focusing in on the U.S., the sylvanite deposit in northern Montana, near a town sometimes known as Sylvanite, also aligns with the triangle. The sylvanite located here is in fairly close proximity to a forest of 800-year-old cedar trees. And both cedars and redwoods are large, aromatic trees that often show up near deposits of telluride ores. For example, the sylvanite in Cripple Creek is about 20 miles south of a petrified forest of redwoods in Florissant, Colorado. And a similar telluride, called calaverite, found in Calaveras County, California, is in proximity to some of the largest redwoods in the world, the sequoias, as well as cedar trees. Even Telluride, Colorado aligns with the sylvanite triangle, though no cedars are present, and the petrified redwoods are a bit far away. In his book Sylva Sylvarum, Francis Bacon noted that cedars grew very large, and credited that for the species' longevity. And it's the size of such trees that seems to be a relevant variable to the tellurides that show up nearby. As I pointed out earlier, the title of Bacon's Sylva Sylvarum is based on the Latin word for wooded forest. It's usually listed as Sylva Sylvarum or Natural History, but Bacon qualified the title in the book. For this writing of our Sylva Sylvarum is, to speak properly, not natural history, but a high kind of natural magic, for it is not a description only of nature, but a breaking of nature into great and strange works. By a breaking of nature, I think Bacon was alluding to the process of dissolution after incorporation, after a chemical wedding, and we still use the term dissolution for divorce today. The very first experiment described in Sylva Sylvarum involves a way to separate salt from seawater, an act of spagyrics, which is both the combining and extracting of medicinal ingredients. The etymology of the word alchemy isn't cut and dried, but some believe that alchemy derived from the Greek word chymica, which, means chemistry. But earlier on it meant to pull together, another way of describing incorporation. And if chymica meant incorporate, might alchymia possibly mean the opposite of that, to unincorporate? If so, then Bacon was definitely referring to alchemy when he wrote, "Let all compounds be dissolved." An incorporation or wedding of chemical elements like gold and tellurium brings to mind the 17th century Rosicrucian allegory, The Chemical Wedding of Christian Rosenkreuz. It's a bizarre story in which, spoiler alert, the bride and groom both die and are brought back to life. But it also brings in several tangents like the constellations, the role of gold in exchange, the role of time and debt, and even an arcane function of cedar trees as they initially guide Christian Rosenkreuz toward the location where the chemical wedding will take place. Let me just briefly repeat that. The cedar trees guide Christian toward the location of a chemical wedding. And I do see a lot of cedars and redwoods, large aromatic trees, in proximity to various deposits of sylvanite, many of which are located in the United States. because in addition to the sylvanite triangle, there's another one, the celestial triangle, that also correlates to several sylvanite deposits. The celestial triangle was researched in depth by Caillea Crone several years ago, who believed it to be a deliberate alignment of national parks and monuments corresponding to a triangle of star constellations. I have to thank Michelle Gibson for telling me about the celestial triangle, and her channel has mirrored Caillea Crone's series on it. I put a link to that in the description. Crone believes it was an intentionally mirrored and flipped reflection of the dimensional gates of the heavens. The ancients believed there were two primary stargates or portals through which the soul traveled. The Silver Gate is located in the hand of Orion, and Crone believes it corresponds to the Gateway Arch in St. Louis, Missouri. The Golden Gate is located at the foot of Ophiuchus and corresponds to the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco. These two gates in Ophiuchus and Orion are 180 degrees apart across the galactic equator. Orion is a constellation often noticed in the sky, but in relation to my research into sylvanite, I find it interesting that a metal ion, a molecule of metal with an electric charge, could also be called an ore ion. The Silver Gate was believed to be the portal through which the soul entered the material realm, through the mater or mother, and was also believed to be the portal at death that one would take to reincarnate back into the same family line. But the Golden Gate was the portal at death that one would take to instead ascend to the heavenly realm and leave the earth and physical incarnation behind. That this would occur through the Golden Gate is reminiscent of the description of gold by Philemon in Carl Jung's Red Book, as assisting those who would ascend. The third gate of the celestial triangle is the Lion's Gate, represented by the Lion's Gate Bridge in Vancouver, British Columbia. It's associated with the Lion's Gate portal, through which the soul can gain clarity and enhanced perception. Astrologers date its opening in Leo from late July to early August, reaching its peak on August the 8th of each year. Each of the three bridges on the triangle points are near deposits of sylvanite. For the Silver Gate, that location is the Pea Ridge Mine, about 75 miles southwest of the St. Louis Arch. For the Golden Gate, the location is Carson Hill in Calaveras County. And for the Lion's Gate, the location is at the Ashlew Mine, about 100 miles north of Vancouver. Another sylvanite deposit on perfect alignment is in Twisp, Washington, at the Wolverine Prospect. In fact, it aligns with both triangles because it's located where they intersect. Twisp is about 20 miles east of the Cedar Creek Trail at Lake Chelan, with a forest of 100-year-old cedars, and it's about 30 miles from the Trail of the Cedars, with trees described as giant. Also on the vector between St. Louis and Vancouver, we find mines in Idaho, Wyoming, Montana, and South Dakota. Another cluster is found on the vector between St. Louis and San Fran, which includes the Charlie Ross Mine, the Mohawk and Goldfield, and the Ann Mason Mine, all in Nevada, as well as Telluride and Cripple Creek in Colorado. These deposits are located between the junipers of Cedar City in western Utah and the petrified redwoods of central Colorado. Next are the loosely aligned mines along the vector from San Francisco up to Vancouver, including the Dedrick Yellow Jacket Mine in California and the Days Creek Chieftain and Grants Pass Jewett mines in Oregon. This cluster of deposits is near the Klamath and Fremont National Forests of both redwoods and cedars. My interest in the celestial triangle is how it aligns with cedars and sylvanite, but Caillea Crone determined that this alignment was based on the location of national monuments. The first national monument designated in the U.S. was Devil's Tower in 1906, and it does loosely correspond with the Celestial Triangle, being located about 50 miles from the mines in Terry and Custer, South Dakota. In fact, just west of Deadwood, a town with an interesting name, is a cluster of 6 deposits of sylvanite. There are 2 more locations of a similar columnar basalt, though Devil's Tower is said to be faunolite, and these basalt locations also correspond with the Celestial Triangle. The Devil's Postpile, designated as a national monument in 1911, and Skinner Butte in Eugene, Oregon, which is not a national monument. I'd like to point out that when geologic anomalies like Devil's Tower and Postpile are designated national monuments, most people are relieved, believing that government control affords these sites protection. But this relief is often misplaced because, ultimately, such control simply allows the government to pick and choose who will investigate and exploit these areas, and which members of the public are no longer allowed on these public lands, past the barrier rope or after hours. What's really interesting about this alignment is that of the 400 deposits of sylvanite on Earth, nearly half of them are located in and around this celestial triangle. Why is that? And why does the triangle veer off to the St. Louis Arch to encompass this one lonely deposit in Missouri? One person many of these sites have in common is a 19th century explorer named John Fremont. Fremont and Kit Carson, reportedly both Freemasons, were exploring and mapping the western states for the U.S. Army in the early 1800s. And Fremont organized his early expeditions from St. Louis. Fremont also named the San Francisco Bay the Golden Gate, and we see in his notes that Fremont used survey data from Vancouver, making St. Louis, San Francisco, and Vancouver key locations on his fact-finding missions. In his diary, Fremont explained his overall mission. This was our projected line of return, a great part of it absolutely new to geographical, botanical, and geological science, and the subject of reports in relation to lakes, rivers, deserts, and savages, which inflamed desire to know what this terra incognita really contained. I think the word contained reveals that Fremont and his superiors were very interested in the mineralogy of the western U.S. and how it could best be exploited, which we see borne out in his private letters. In 1848, he wrote a letter to John Torrey, a botanist who would later publish a catalog of Fremont's plant findings. Fremont tells Torrey, "I mentioned to you that I am drawing up to be presented to Congress a brief memoir upon California. It is intended to give some data for forming an estimate of the real value of the country." Fremont had 2 concerns that stand out in his correspondence: the mining of gold and the cataloging of large trees. His letter to Torrey goes on to say, "In mentioning trees, I am anxious to be as exact and definite as possible, and will thank you for the name of the large cedar." 1850 was an important year for Fremont with regard to mining gold. On May 2nd of 1850, Fremont got this report back regarding a gold sample he sent to Robert Patterson, telling him that the fineness of the gold was 888.5 thousandths. On May 19th, Fremont wrote the following in a letter to Richard Robert. The gold showed in the side in a thickness of about 2 feet. And 2 days later, on May 21st, Fremont drew up a power of attorney, stating, "Whereas I, John Charles Fremont of California, proprietor of lands in that territory containing gold ore, and desire that said gold and quicksilver ores should be mined. And then on May 28th, Fremont reported to Charles Mayer, "I have heard by letter that a piece of rock was broken from my vein, containing several pounds of gold in one mass." Fremont became a veritable institution of the West, and numerous places were named for him, including Cripple Creek, as well as Fremont County, Colorado, just to its south. One of the national forests of redwoods and cedars near the Oregon sylvanite mines is also named for him, as is the town of Fremont, California, and Fremont Peak south of San Jose. In fact, places named for Fremont are too numerous to list here, but what's perhaps most important is that it was Fremont who named the Golden Gate Bridge, writing, "To this gate I give the name of Chrysopolis, or Golden Gate, for the same reasons that the harbor of Byzantium was called Chrysoceres, or Golden Horn." Was Fremont's naming of the Golden Gate an act of geomancy? He wasn't naming the bridge, of course, as that wasn't built until 1933. He was naming the entrance to the San Francisco Bay. But was he deliberately connecting Chrysopolis with Ophiuchus and the Golden Gate of the heavens? I can only speculate, but from his notes we know Fremont determined latitude using Polaris and Ursa Minor, and longitude using Arcturus and Boötes. It's certainly plausible that he knew of the Golden Gate's location in Ophiuchus. But the fact that Fremont was utilizing Arcturus in the Boötes constellation took my mind to Shakespeare, Bacon, and the work of Peter Amundsen. I've mentioned Petter's work before, and some of his finds that were disclosed in the documentary Cracking the Shakespeare Code. And like the controllers who deliberately projected the celestial triangle on the upper northwest, Petter found that Francis Bacon and the Rosicrucians hid a map of constellations in Shakespeare's first folio, and that this was also a map meant to be projected onto the earth. The map was hidden in the introductory poem to the reader. Petter decodes a Greek substitution cipher into the reader, where the first letters of every odd-numbered line are replaced with Greek letters. These odd-numbered lines spell out the constellation Boötes in Greek, and the even-numbered lines contain the letters of Wain, which is the Big Dipper in Ursa Major. References to Boötes and Wain also show up in Henry IV Part 1 on page 53, a number important to Freemasons. It's interesting to note that at least one of the archive.org copies of Shakespeare's first folio omits page 53 from the histories, as if this page might contain something worth hiding. Page 53 does contain a few items of interest, including a word used only once in all of Shakespeare's work, the word wonyers. I referenced it in an earlier video called Of Monsters and Money, in which I discuss money as one eye, a coin, which is also the end result of mining gold and silver ore. And this word wonyers is in close proximity to the word Boötes. Peter Amundsen famously found the Boötes-Wain alignment on page 53, as well as the eggs and bacon signature line of Francis Bacon. He plotted these two lines into a cross, and then found another instance of Boötes on page 37 of the Histories, another number important to the Freemasons. Here he divines the star named Deneb in Cygnus, which I think is supported back on page 53. Because if you draw a line down from this Masonic angle number 53 to Bacon's name, the line runs through another mention of Boötes as boats, and in the line above, the word dog, a reference to the dogs of Boötes, a lesser-known constellation. If you plot the line from Wain to Boötes in the heavens, and also plot the signature line from eggs to bacon, that signature line hits the Eye of Chara, one of the dogs of Boötes. And if you extend that line from Chara through the name of Bacon, you'll hit, again, Deneb and Cygnus. And we can take this even further, because, according to Peter Dawkins, a Baconian scholar, Bacon also plotted a navigational line into North America, from his estate at Gorhambury to Jamestown in the New World. And from here, we can plot what turns out to be a smaller companion to the celestial triangle. Dawkins writes that the ley line across Gorhambury Estate from Bacon's Mount and on through the Tudor mansion is oriented approximately in the 287-degree compass direction. The line goes straight to the place in Virginia where Jamestown was originally located. In doing so, it passes close to Oak Island, Nova Scotia. If we use the line from Oak Island to Jamestown and orient that with a line from Deneb in Cygnus to Arcturus in Boötes, we can extrapolate a position for Wain. And projecting it onto the Earth as a mirrored reflection, we find that the third point of the triangle, representing Wain, lands on a small town in New York called Swain. The mainstream will tell us this is a coincidence and that the town of Swain was named in 1852 for a Mr. Swain, no first name given. What's notable here is that this triangle's proportions are almost identical to those of the celestial triangle. When reversed and scaled up, the Bacon triangle almost exactly overlays the celestial one. And near Swain, there's something odd in the landscape. If we follow the road called England Hill, it meanders northwesterly, then straightens out north of town to this anomaly in the landscape. From above, it looks like an illustration of a tree, or maybe the petrified roots of a tree leading back to what looks like a sawn-off stump. I'm not sure what this is, but looking at it takes my mind back full circle to the chemical wedding of Christian Rosenkreuz. You'll recall that this is the story where the cedar trees direct Christian regarding which way to take to get to a chemical wedding. Once he arrives, he's put through several bizarre tests of the initiate, and on the 5th day of his adventure, his guide leads him to a cave that Christian probably shouldn't enter. It's an area known as the King's Treasury, in which there's a triangular sepulchre. Inside this is a copper vessel with an angel standing inside. In the angel's hand is a tree that continually drops fruit into the copper vessel. When the fruit hits the vessel, it turns to water and flows out 3 further vessels. Christian and his guide venture further down and find the dormant body of Venus. Behind her is written, "When the fruit of my tree shall be quite melted down, then I shall awake and be the mother of a king." Another version of this idea is quoted from the castle's astrologer, Atlas, 1 paragraph further down, who reportedly had said, "When the tree shall be quite melted down, then shall Lady Venus awake and be the mother of a king." In this story, the only character claiming Venus as his mother is Cupid, whose job it is to join together, incorporating 2 into 1. But it won't be until the melting tree finishes its task of dissolution that Venus will then be mother to a king, whose alchemical task is then complete. Soon after all this, the bride and groom, the young queen and king, are abruptly beheaded, and nobody seems surprised at this. It's all a part of the chemical wedding, and a plan is immediately put in place to bring them back to life. This process is complicated and more detailed than we need to go into here, But the relevant piece is that the bodies of the king and queen are eventually melted down, like ore, presumably as an act of purification. The last half of Shakespeare's The Phoenix and the Turtle seems to apply here. Here the anthem doth commence, love and constancy is dead, Phoenix and the turtle fled in a mutual flame from hence. So they loved as love in twain, had the essence but in one. Two distincts, division none, number there in love was slain. Hearts remote yet not asunder, distance and no space was seen, twixt this turtle and his queen, but in them it were a wonder. So between them love did shine, that the turtle saw his right, flaming in the phoenix sight, either was the other's mine. Property was thus appalled, that the self was not the same, single nature's double name, neither two nor one was called. Reason in itself confounded, saw division grow together, to themselves yet either neither, simple were so well compounded, that it cried how true a twain seemeth this concordant one. Love has reason, reason none, if what parts can so remain. Whereupon it made this threne, to the phoenix and the dove, co-supreme and stars of love, as chorus to their tragic scene. This poem is about incorporation and dissolution, the compound in twain. It's another chemical wedding, tragic because the phoenix and the turtle dove are caught in the loop of drawing together and pulling apart. I omitted reading the first half of this poem simply for time, but it begins in a single Arabian tree. Critics believe this tree to be the Lot tree, the Sidrat al-Muntaha, marking the boundary of the seventh heaven. A Lot tree is also referred to as a sitter tree, a name phonetically similar, though botanically unrelated, we're told, to the cedar tree. But there's another Arabian tree that comes to mind, the cedars of Lebanon. Please join us in Silveritas to continue this conversation. The link is in the description. I'm grateful for any feedback. Please leave your thoughts in the comments, and thank you for watching.